Thanks very much for inviting me to present today. So I'm going to be presenting on the situation with cabotegravir in Brazil. I don't have any disclosures. Now, we need to remember VIV has excluded Brazil from the voluntary license for cabotegravir. It cannot access this drug at access prices. It has to pay a premium price. And the question is, should Brazil actually, in that case, use cabotegravir to prevent HIV infections despite its very high expected cost and limited PrEP budgets? And we lead to a conclusion that Brazil needs to invoke compulsory licensing, break the patent on cabotegravir in order to access this drug at a cost-effective price and it to be manufactured independently of the drug company. Now let's look at the situation in Brazil. This is a country that's been excluded from the voluntary license despite a rapidly growing epidemic year on year and actually more new infections year on year. The continent of South America generally has been excluded from the voluntary license, despite it being one of the regions in the world where new infections are growing in the last 10 years versus countries in Africa where the epidemic is more relatively declining. So if we think about the two alternatives, we've got Truvada, TDFFTC or cabotegravir, and we've got various trials that have shown relative efficacy. So we've got IPREX, PROUD and IPIGAY showing significant reductions in HIV incidence for Truvada versus placebo. We need to remember, though, that in order to prevent one infection, you have to give a PrEP to a lot of people. This NNTB, number of people to treat to cause benefit, ranges from 28 to 42 for TDFFTC. And then we have the HPTN studies, which were announced around the same time that COVID vaccines were first discovered to be effective. In the years since COVID vaccines were shown to be effective, billions of people have received those vaccines. In that same time, hardly anybody worldwide has received cabotegravir, and its effect on public health up to now has been basically close to zero. We've seen a 66% overall reduction in the HPTN 083 study for CAB-LA versus TDFFTC, but you need to treat another 22 people to prevent a single infection. So if we think about the situation with Brazil and PrEP, 49,000 new HIV infections in 2022. If we concentrated on the MSM population, assuming a 5% incidence, we would need to treat 33 people with TDFFTC to prevent a single infection. Now, if we multiply that up, we're talking about huge numbers of people receiving PrEP in Brazil to fully optimize its effects. Over 1 million people needing to receive TDFFTC. However, the budget is only $6 million a year. Now let's look at the prices. If you take out the voluntary license, what are the actual commercial prices of cabotegravir LA? $22,200 for one person for 1 year in the United States, $9,275 in the UK, despite the Clinton Foundation estimating this drug could be manufactured for around $30, with prices going even lower than that when manufactured at scale in the future. Let's look at the VIV MPP license. Now, the green countries are those that are included in the license. The red countries are excluded. So we have 90 countries concentrating on Africa, 53% of the world population is included. The press release, when the voluntary license was issued, said the deal will allow low and lower middle income countries, as well as all African countries, regardless of income level, to access affordable generic versions of the drug, enabling access to HIV prevention medicine in countries most affected by HIV. This is the VIV press release. Now, despite Brazil having a rapidly growing epidemic and infections rising year on year, look at the countries that are included and excluded from the voluntary license and look at their income. You would think that a country with a similar income to an African country with a rapidly rising epidemic would be included, but it's not. So we've got South Africa, Botswana, with gross national incomes in the region of $7,000 a year included. And then we've got Thailand, Brazil, Mexico. We've got countries with similar incomes, but they're excluded because they're outside Africa. So we looked at the effects of this on the affordability of cabotegravir in Brazil. 6 different scenarios. So no PrEP, event-driven PrEP, where it's given for a quarter of the time when it's needed, costing $12 a year with Truvada. Continuous PrEP, as in the previous presentation. Now, Cabotegravir, we assumed a 60% reduction in the UK price, which tends to be what happens with Brazilian drugs. They're given at a discount, but they're not given at the access price. There's been an estimate of the potential access price of $250 from MSF, and then we looked at the CHAI target price of $30 a year. We took estimates of the incidence of HIV in Brazil from studies of MSM, ranging from 0.9 to 7.4%, and we chose 5% as an estimate for this analysis. We've run it different ways, we reached the same conclusion. We also assumed a $6 million annual budget for HIV prevention. Again, that can be changed and the results stay the same. A target population of 250,000 MSM at high risk of HIV infection. An $18 annual cost per person for HIV testing and counselling, in addition to the cost of the drugs. We then assumed that Truvada would lead to a 70% reduction in HIV incidence versus no PrEP, and that continuous and event-driven TDFFTC are equally effective based on Prevenir, Proud, and Ipagay, and then an additional 66% reduction in HIV incidence for cabotegravir versus TDFFTC. So if a country has $6 million and a Cabotegravir is that expensive, what potential impact can it have? So if you have $6 million, you can give almost 250,000 people event-driven TDFFTC. You can give 94,000 people continuous TDFFTC. By contrast, if Brazil has to pay $3,500 per person per year, they can only treat 1,700 people with that as PrEP. Now, the consequence is that this is the number of HIV infections you could prevent for $6 million. If you had TDFFTC event-driven, you'd be able to prevent 8,077 infections with that $6 million budget. By contrast, if you have TDFFTC continuous, 3,281. Now, if we think about the Brazilian price of cabotegravir, we don't know what it is at the moment. If it was in line with other pricing agreements, we'd only prevent 77 infections with that $6 million budget. It simply would not be worth using. Even if we get down to $250, it only prevents 1,000 infections versus 8,000 for event-driven TDFFTC. And it's only, and this is very consistent with the last speaker looking at South Africa, it's only when the price of cabotegravir falls to below $100 and particularly down to $30 that it becomes the right thing to do compared to giving far larger numbers of people tenofovir FTC event-driven. So what is this leading to? If you had $6 million, would you spend it on giving a more effective drug which costs thousands of dollars and treating very few people? Or would you go the other way and you have this idea of protection packs? Now, the idea here is that you take event-driven one stage further. You have a school, a university, a group of commercial sex workers. You give everybody a short course of Truvada or even TLD with some HIV self-tests, and you give it to huge numbers of people, and even if it benefits a small proportion of them, you've given it to so many people that you're able to have a far higher level of coverage to prevent HIV infections. You could then combine that protection pack with helplines, support networks, emergency contraception access, condoms. That all takes money, but if you've used all the money up by using cabotegravir at branded prices, you don't have money for this sort of strategy. So in conclusion, when the demand for PrEP is high and budgets are limited, the price of Cabotegravir could mean that very small numbers actually receive PrEP. Cabotegravir is so expensive that there's no funding left to treat other people. And the result actually is damaging for a health system. The result is higher overall HIV infections for Cabotegravir versus using TDFFTC. And Cabolet will only lower HIV infection rates if costing less than $30 per year. And that simply isn't happening. We're hearing that Cabolet is going to be far more expensive than that. And this is a stable conclusion. Other people are reaching this conclusion looking at other countries. Of course, and for Brazil, across a wide range of HIV incidence estimates. Now, we need to understand why Brazil and other South American countries, and also Thailand, have been excluded from the VIV MPP license despite having fast-growing HIV epidemics and a similar income level to countries in Africa that have been included. And one option here, and what Brazil and Thailand and other countries have done in the past, is they actually take over the patent. They take control of their own production and they start making the drug themselves. This is what Brazil's done in the past for efavirenz, for Kaletra, for certain cancer drugs, and it has been successful in doing so. So until Cabolet is affordable, mass distribution of event-driven TDFFTC in this form of protection packs should prevent the most infections. Thanks very much for your time.